Good morning. My name is Joe, and my pronouns are he and him, and I can't read the name Habakkuk without wondering if he's in any way related to the prophet Chewbacca, from a galaxy far, far away. Christmas is a season of wonder, as in, I wonder why we're telling the story of the fiery furnace on the first Sunday of Advent. Not what you were expecting to hear this morning, right? Advent is the prequel to the Christmas story. We're used to hearing about Mary and Joseph, Elizabeth, maybe John the Baptist, angels and dreams, hints of the coming birth of the Messiah. But today we hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't have those guys in my nativity set. How about you? So I wonder what's going on. The good news is there is a solid explanation. The bad news is it's not going to be very interesting to most of you, so I'm not going to get into it right now. I did have a full church nerd version written up, but the rest of you would have gotten a 10-minute nap. The very short version is that a couple of years ago, the materials that we use to plan our Advent services switched from using the Revised Common Lectionary to the Narrative Lectionary. A lectionary is a way of organizing Bible text into a schedule of weekly readings for worship. I'm losing some of you already. For the last 2 decades here at Wildwood, we've been using at Advent the reading schedule from the Revised Common Lectionary, and that schedule repeats every 3 years. So those stories and texts are pretty familiar to us by now. But this year we are using the schedule of the Narrative Lectionary, for better and for worse. The worst being that this season, which is all about tradition and familiarity, it's now disrupted with very different images from the fiery furnace. Next week we get Ezekiel's Valley of the Dry Bones, the first Black Friday perhaps. I know that this is a bit jarring, but there is at least an angel in this story too. And the disruption, I hope, gets our attention and invites us to make fresh connections and new ways of seeing. There will be plenty of Christmas in this season, I promise. Just a little bit more torture and zombie skeletons than we're used to. There is a point, I promise. For today, the link between this story and the traditional Christmas story is wonder and hope. Now, the narrative lectionary is organized in a way to tell the whole story of the Bible one time through every year. It starts in the fall, telling stories of the Hebrew Bible, of Abraham and Jacob, the Exodus, the Promised Land, and the divided kingdoms of Israel. Here at Wildwood, we were busy talking this fall about creation care and how to be good neighbors. So we missed all of this backstory, and we're jumping into the middle of the season in progress. By the end of November, the narrative lectionary is telling the part of the story where the people of God have been carried off into exile from Palestine to Babylon. And so we hear the prophet Habakkuk cry out in anger, "My God, how long will I cry for help and you not listen? I cry out to you violence, but you don't deliver us. Why do you show me injustice and look at anguish so that devastation and violence are before me? There is strife and conflict abounds. The law is ineffective. Justice does not endure. Because the wicked surround the righteous, justice becomes warped." This is the cry of a people in exile, far from their homeland, forced to obey and serve the government that conquered them. They are the losers trying to build a life among the victors, people who think that they are better than them. There is strife and conflict abounds. How can they possibly call themselves the people of God in the midst of this disaster? And yet, right in the middle, the prophet hears the voice of God. Look at the nations and see. Be astonished, be astounded, for work is being done in your days that you would not believe if you were told. Be amazed, not because everything is peachy, but because God is present, and God is up to something amazing, even in the middle of the disaster. That's the common thread of these unusual Advent stories offered by the narrative lectionary. These are stories of wonder. I see several levels of amazing in the story of the fiery furnace. If we take this at face value, this is a story of miracles. I count at least three. The obvious one is the firewalking part. The storyteller goes out of their way to make it clear that this is no trick. The heat of the furnace is so intense that even the soldiers who pushed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire were killed by the heat. They could not have survived, let alone walked out, not even singed. God was with them in the fire, a miracle. No less of a miracle was the way the Jews stood up to power when everyone around them was giving in. I'm sure most of you can think of a time when you had a choice to stand up for your values, to speak or act differently than the crowd. I remember one day from grade 7, a group of kids were picking on one of our classmates, Amanda. She was the usual target, and I usually wasn't much nicer to her than anyone else. But on that day, the bullies were being particularly mean, or maybe I had just had enough. In some way, the ridicule crossed some imaginary line in my head. And with much fear and trembling, I told them to stop, knock it off, which of course merely had the effect of making me the new target for the day. Wasn't a big deal. It's grade 7, there's no threat of fiery torture. But 30 years later, I still remember my heart racing, palms sweaty, knees weak. It's hard to stand up for what you know to be right. We see people capitulating all over the place to power, switching sides, rationalizing, cowering, bowing down. It gets easier to stand if there's a bunch of others standing with you, elbows up, but 3 against the whole crowd, that's a miracle. God was with them. And then there's maybe the biggest miracle of the day. We didn't get to this part in the children's story, but do you remember what happens after King Nebuchadnezzar brings Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the fire? He brings them out, and then King Nebuchadnezzar is impressed. He changes his mind. He's impressed by their salvation in the fire and their courage to stand against him. So impressed that he changes. He reverses his position. He officially endorses the God of the Jews. He made it illegal for anyone to persecute them, like moments after he had thrown them into the fire. And then he made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego advisors in the king's court. The statue guy humbled himself and proclaimed the greatness of Yahweh. Who saw that coming? We invest so much in our forecasting. Oh, well, if this person is elected, well, they're going to do this or that. If this treaty is signed, if that bill passes, if that decision goes the wrong way, it's going to mean whatever. Especially in politics and world news. I mean, this is the most important election in our lifetimes. But also in our personal lives, every decision feels critical because we are so sure that it's going to lead to a particular outcome. We make these decisions based on predictions all the time, especially when we're rationalizing, well, I had to stay quiet or else this is going to happen, especially when it's something that they are going to do to us. Well, they're never going to change. That's just who they are. I have to win. I have to beat them. That's the only way. Maybe, but maybe not. Things happen. People change. We can't control outcomes. Maybe God is up to something over there in them, just as God is up to something in me. Feels like a long shot, but Nebuchadnezzar changed. Amazing. One more level of wonder. This story is rather unbelievable. It feels like a children's story. Some of us are skeptics. My best guess is that this story was never meant to be a record of a historical event. Probably didn't happen exactly as it is told. But what do I know? There's a whole world full of incredible things and experiences that I have no rational explanation for. And the whole point of the story is that it is unbelievable. So it's kind of obtuse for me to criticize that. I think it's unlikely that it actually happened. What I do know is that what the Bible scholars say is that this story was written down around 4 centuries after the events of the story. Eventually, some of the Jews returned from Babylon, returned to their homeland, and rebuilt Jerusalem. And eventually, history repeats, and another foreign emperor invaded and subjugated and persecuted the Jews in Israel. And in that context, the people of God looked back. They looked to their ancestors for inspiration. They remembered the prophet Daniel in Babylon and the lion's dens and the fiery furnace. And in those stories, they found hope and courage and a reason to make their own stand for what is right. Did God rescue them from their fiery furnaces? Maybe. There are some pretty cool miracle stories from the 2nd century Judaism as well. The Habakkuk story comes from those days of the Maccabean revolt. But mostly not. Many of the Jews were cut down and carried off. The threat was real. God didn't intervene. They lived the cry of Habakkuk. There is strife and conflict abounds. The law is ineffective. Justice does not endure because the wicked surround the righteous. Excuse me. Where is God in the middle of the disaster? God is with us. Like God was with our ancestors in Babylon in their disaster, God was up to something that they didn't understand and they couldn't see then. And God is up to something now. Their faith led them to their salvation. Our faith will lead us to ours. How do we know? We don't know. They didn't know. They chose to trust. Will we choose to trust? That's the real miracle story, the choice to trust. The people who told and passed down the story of the fiery furnace, they did the thing that happened in the story. That's what gave it power, gives it power. Of course, this is the situation that we are in as well. These stories of the Old Testament, like the stories of Christmas, are calling us to take part, to be inspired to follow, to trust as they did in our time, to stand for what we know is right in the face of uncertain outcomes. The stories can transform us, move us to join in the long arc of the people of God. Jim Dick shared with me this introduction to the poetry book Adventure by Mark Greene. Every year I come back to Christmas like a traveler returning home after a year away in a foreign land. I know this place, and I'm pleased to be here. The pictures on the walls are familiar, like the people and the events of the Christmas story. I am enriched, comforted by the old things, but I see new things and see the old things in new ways. I have changed. I am changing. We all are. Ideas surface, gleam, and take flight. Christmas, the Christmas that is not about the bubbly frenzy of all the preparations for the big day, still retains its shimmering mystery. Ordinary people caught up in the divine drama that is the hinge of history. They are invited to take part as we are, seeking as we can, choosing as we do, pressured as we are, afraid and exhilarated, and in the end, grateful and awed and content. Welcome to Advent, my ordinary people. May we too find ourselves caught up in a divine drama that is the hinge of history, our small part anyway. Merry Christmas, may it be.